Some collisions happen in slow motion, giving you time to brace for impact, but this one struck Zaria Coleman like lightning, sudden, electric, and utterly devastating to her perfectly planned Tuesday morning. The autumn wind whipped through downtown Washington, D.C., with the kind of bitter chill that reminded everyone winter was approaching fast. Zaria clutched the rolled architectural blueprints against her chest like armor, her designer heels clicking a determined rhythm against the Kennedy Center's marble steps. The morning meeting with the Historical Preservation Committee had stretched 30 minutes longer than scheduled, and she now had exactly 8 minutes to reach the DuPont Circle construction site before the afternoon walkthrough with the structural engineers. Her phone buzzed insistently in her purse, probably her assistant confirming the timeline she was already behind on. Zaria quickened her pace, mentally rehearsing the presentation she would deliver to the construction crew about the 19th century building's delicate restoration requirements. Historic preservation was her specialty, the reason Banneker and Associates had promoted her to senior project manager at 29, making her the youngest department head in the firm's 40-year history. She was so absorbed in her mental calculations that she never saw him coming. The collision happened at the corner of Virginia Avenue and New Hampshire, where the Kennedy Center's Grand Plaza met the bustling sidewalk. One moment, Zaria was navigating around a cluster of tourists photographing the Potomac River, and the next, she was sprawling backward, her carefully organized blueprints exploding into the air like oversized confetti. Her morning coffee, a perfectly crafted oat milk latte from her favorite Capitol Hill cafe, arced through the autumn air in a graceful amber parabola before landing with devastating precision across the front of the most expensive suit she had ever seen in person. Jesus Christ! The voice that emerged from the coffee-soaked figure was deep, cultured, and currently vibrating with barely controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Zaria found herself staring up at a man who looked like he had stepped directly from the pages of Forbes magazine. Everything about him screamed wealth and privilege, from his perfectly styled dark hair to his hand-stitched Italian leather shoes. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of sharp jawline that belonged in cologne advertisements, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Chesapeake Bay. Those eyes were currently blazing with indignation as he surveyed the coffee damage spreading across his charcoal gray suit jacket. "Well," he demanded, apparently expecting either an apology or an explanation for the laws of physics. Something about his entitled tone, the automatic assumption that she owed him deference, ignited every stubborn streak Zaria had inherited from her mother Ruby. She pushed herself to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster, brushing invisible dust from her burgundy blazer. "I have an idea," she said coolly, bending to gather her scattered blueprints with deliberate calm. "You walked into me while I was clearly navigating around those tourists. Basic situational awareness suggests you should watch where you're going, especially in a pedestrian area." His mouth actually fell open. "I walked into you? Lady, you came flying around that corner like you were being chased by the FBI. I was walking at a normal pace." Zaria rolled the blueprints with practiced efficiency, noting that thankfully none of the delicate drawings had been damaged. "And the name is Ms. Coleman, not Lady." Something flickered across his features, surprise perhaps, or grudging respect. Most people, she suspected, immediately offered apologies and compensation when they encountered Hayden Thorne's displeasure. The recognition hit her suddenly. She knew that face from the business section of the Washington Post. Real estate mogul, construction empire, one of DC's most eligible bachelors, according to the society pages. "Look," he said, his tone shifting slightly toward conciliation. I have a meeting in 20 minutes with investors who expect me to look like I know how to dress myself. This suit cost more than most people's rent. Then perhaps you should have been more careful with it. Zarya secured her blueprints with the leather strap and shouldered her bag. I suggest you find a good dry cleaner. There's an excellent one on Connecticut Avenue if you need a recommendation. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Wait. When she glanced back, he was studying her with curiosity rather than anger. At least let me buy you another coffee. It's the least I can do after... He gestured vaguely at the chaos surrounding them. After walking into me and ruining my morning schedule? Zarya consulted her watch with pointed emphasis. I don't think so. I don't have time for entitled men in expensive suits who think money solves everything. She walked away without looking back, leaving Hayden Thorne standing on the sidewalk with coffee stains mapping dark continents across his chest and an expression of complete bewilderment on his patrician features. It wasn't until she was halfway to her car that Zarya realized her hands were shaking slightly, not from the collision itself, but from the way those storm-grey eyes had looked at her in those final moments, not with anger or dismissal, but with something that felt dangerously close to fascination. By the time she reached the construction site, she had nearly forgotten about the encounter entirely. The Meridian House restoration project demanded her complete attention, a 1920s mansion being converted into luxury condominiums while preserving every detail of its historic character. The kind of challenge that required surgical precision and exhaustive attention to detail. She was deep in conversation with the lead contractor about the ornate plasterwork when her assistant Michelle approached with a worried expression. Zarya, there's been a development. The property owner wants to schedule an additional site visit this week. He's apparently taking a more hands-on approach to the project. Fine, Zarya said absently, marking notes on her clipboard. Schedule it for Thursday afternoon, and make sure he understands that any changes to the preservation plan need approval from the historical committee. About that, Michelle said carefully, the owner's name is Hayden Thorne. Zarya's pen stopped moving across the page. Slowly she raised her eyes to meet her assistant's gaze. Did you just say Hayden Thorne? The one and only. Thorne Development. Owns this property and 3 others in our current portfolio. He's worth about $800 million, according to the research I pulled. The blueprints suddenly felt heavy in Zarya's hands as the full implications crashed over her like a second collision. The man she had just dismissed as an entitled suit-wearing disaster was not only wealthy beyond imagination, he was her client. More specifically, he was the client who now had the power to make her professional life either very comfortable or absolutely miserable, depending on how vindictive billionaires tended to be when publicly humiliated by women who refused to apologize for their own clumsiness. Michelle, Zarya said carefully, please tell me you're joking. Her assistant's sympathetic wince was answer enough. Chapter 2. Professional Boundaries. The universe, Zarya had decided by Wednesday morning, possessed a particularly cruel sense of humor that manifested itself through impossible coincidences and perfectly timed disasters. She stood in the marble-appointed lobby of Thorne Development's K Street headquarters, fighting the urge to fidget with her portfolio case while the receptionist, a blonde vision of professional perfection, murmured into her headset about Mr. Thorne's availability. The building itself was a monument to understated wealth, soaring ceilings, contemporary art that probably cost more than Zarya's annual salary, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that whispered of serious money-changing hands. Ms. Coleman? The receptionist's voice carried the practiced warmth of someone trained to manage difficult clients. Mr. Thorne will see you now. 32nd floor, corner office. The elevator bank is just behind you." The ride to the 32nd floor felt eternal, giving Zaria ample time to rehearse her professional demeanor and pray that Hayden Thorne was the type of businessman who separated personal slights from professional obligations. She had spent the previous evening researching everything she could find about him. Harvard MBA, inherited family business at 25, expanded the company's portfolio from regional construction to national real estate development, known for his attention to detail and demanding standards. Nothing in his professional biography suggested he would be petty enough to sabotage a project over spilled coffee. But wealth had a way of amplifying personality traits, both positive and negative. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that belonged in Architectural Digest, all clean lines and expensive materials that somehow managed to feel warm rather than sterile. Another assistant, this one a distinguished man in his 50s, guided her through a maze of glass-walled offices where serious people in serious suits conducted serious business. "Mr. Thorne is finishing a conference call," the assistant explained. As they approached a set of imposing double doors, "He should be available momentarily." Through the partially open doorway, Zaria could hear the familiar voice that had haunted her thoughts for the past 18 hours, though now it carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "The timeline is non-negotiable, Patterson. If your team can't deliver the environmental impact study by Friday, we'll find someone who can." A pause, presumably for protest from the unfortunate Patterson. "I don't care about your staffing issues. That's your problem to solve, not mine." The conversation ended with what sounded like a phone being placed decisively into its cradle, followed by a moment of silence that felt charged with potential disaster. "Send her in," came the voice from within. Zaria squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked into the office of the man she had essentially told to go find a dry cleaner. The space was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the National Mall, custom furniture that managed to be both luxurious and functional personal touches that suggested this was more than just a corporate showpiece. But Zaria's attention focused immediately on the man behind the massive mahogany desk. Hayden Thorne looked up from a stack of documents, and for a moment, time seemed to crystallize around them like amber preserving an insect. He was wearing a different suit today, navy blue instead of the coffee-stained charcoal, but the effect was equally devastating. Those storm-gray eyes met hers with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ms. Coleman," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral, "please have a seat." She settled into the chair across from his desk, placing her portfolio case precisely in her lap and folding her hands over it like a shield. "Mr. Thorne, I believe we need to discuss the Meridian House project." "Yes," he agreed, leaning back in his chair with the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We certainly do. But first, I think we should address the elephant in the room." Zaria's stomach tightened. "If you're referring to yesterday's incident, the incident where you lectured me about situational awareness and then walked away like I was some kind of street corner nuisance." His tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath, the silk. "That incident? I apologize if my reaction seemed unprofessional," Zaria said carefully, though the words tasted like chalk in her mouth. "I was running late for an important meeting, and the collision caught me off guard." "Apology accepted," Hayden said, surprising her. "Though I have to admit, it's been a long time since someone dismissed me quite so thoroughly. Most people tend to be more accommodating." There was something in his voice, not mockery exactly, but a kind of curious appreciation that made Zaria's professional instincts prickle with warning. She had encountered this before. Wealthy men who found Her refusal to be impressed by their status intriguing rather than insulting. It never ended well. "I prefer to keep my professional relationships strictly professional," she said firmly, "which brings us to why I'm here. The Meridian House restoration is a complex project with very specific historical requirements. The building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which means every modification must be approved by the Preservation Committee." "I'm aware of the restrictions," Hayden said, pulling a thick folder from his desk drawer. "I've reviewed the entire file." "Your reputation for this kind of work is impressive, Ms. Coleman. The renovation of the Corcoran Museum Annex was particularly well executed." Zaria blinked in surprise. "You researched my previous projects?" "I research everything that affects my investments, including the people I hire to manage them." He opened the folder and began spreading photographs and documents across the desk. "I'm not interested in cutting corners or compromising the building's historical integrity. What I am interested in is a timeline that doesn't stretch into the next decade." For the next hour, they worked through the project specifications with the kind of focused intensity that made Zaria forget about everything except the intricate dance of preservation and modernization. Hayden asked intelligent questions, offered thoughtful suggestions, and demonstrated a grasp of construction logistics that impressed her despite herself. It wasn't until they reached the topic of the building's original hardwood floors that the conversation took an unexpected turn. "The plans call for complete refinishing," Hayden noted, pointing to a specific notation on the blueprint. "But wouldn't that damage the wood's patina? Part of the historical value comes from the natural aging, doesn't it?" Zaria looked up from the documents to find him studying her with genuine curiosity rather than the calculating assessment she had expected. "You're absolutely right. We're planning to use a specialized restoration technique that preserves the original character while addressing the structural damage. It's more expensive and time-consuming, but the results are worth it." "Cost isn't the primary concern," he said, which might have been the first time in Zaria's professional career that a client had uttered those words without irony. "Quality is—" Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment Zaria felt something shift in the atmosphere between them, a recognition of shared standards and complementary expertise that had nothing to do with spilled coffee or damaged suits. Then Hayden's assistant knocked on the doorframe, breaking the spell. "Sir, your lunch appointment is here." "Already?" Hayden consulted his watch with visible reluctance. "Time flies when you're discussing 19th century construction techniques." "Apparently." As Zaria gathered her materials, she felt his attention like a physical weight. When she stood to leave, he rose as well, coming around the desk with fluid grace. "Miss Coleman," he said as she reached the door, "would you consider having dinner with me? I'd like to continue this conversation in a less formal setting." The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Zaria felt her carefully constructed professional boundaries suddenly seem insufficient for the task at hand. "I don't mix business with pleasure, Mr. Thorne," she said finally. "It's a policy that has served me well. What if I promised to limit the conversation to 18th century masonry techniques and proper restoration of period lighting fixtures?" Despite herself, Zaria almost smiled. Almost. "Good night, Mr. Thorne." She left him standing in his office doorway, and this time she was absolutely certain he was watching her walk away with more than professional interest. The elevator ride down seemed even longer than the ride up, giving her too much time to wonder why refusing his invitation felt more like a loss than a victory. Chapter 3. A Glimpse of Her World. The autumn afternoon painted DC in shades of gold and amber when Zaria finally escaped the Meridian House construction site. her clothes dusted with plaster, and her mind buzzing with the satisfaction of a problem solved. She had spent the day mediating between the electrical contractor and the historical preservation specialist over the proper installation of period-appropriate lighting fixtures, a delicate negotiation that required equal parts technical expertise and diplomatic finesse. The kind of challenge that reminded her why she had fallen in love with restoration work in the first place, the intricate puzzle of honoring the past while serving the present. Now, driving through the familiar streets of Anacostia toward Amara's after-school program, Zaria felt the day's professional armor gradually dissolving into something softer and more essential. This was her favorite transition, the moment when she stopped being Senior Project Manager Coleman and became simply Mama, the most important role she would ever play. The Bright Futures Learning Center occupied a converted Victorian house on Good Hope Road, its cheerful yellow exterior and hand-painted sign radiating the kind of warmth that made parents feel their children were truly safe and cherished. Zaria had chosen this program not just for its excellent reputation, but for its diverse student body and commitment to celebrating every child's unique potential. She was 5 minutes early, a minor miracle given the day's complications, so she settled onto one of the wooden benches outside the entrance to watch the controlled chaos of pickup time. Parents arrived in vehicles ranging from luxury SUVs to aging sedans, united in the universal experience of navigating the complex logistics of working parenthood. "Mama!" The voice that called her name carried pure joy, and Zaria's heart performed its daily miracle of expansion as 7-year-old Amara Coleman burst through the center's front doors like a force of nature. Amara was sunshine personified, all endless energy and infectious curiosity, with her father's warm brown eyes and Zaria's determined chin. Today, she wore her favorite purple leggings and a Hello Kitty sweatshirt that had seen better days, but remained her absolute favorite because Hello Kitty understands about friendship, Mama. "Hey, baby girl," Zaria said, opening her arms for the enthusiastic hug that made every difficult moment of the day worthwhile. "How was school today?" "Amazing," Amara declared, which was her standard response regardless of actual events. "We learned about the Washington Monument, and Miss Jennifer said it's the tallest stone structure in the world, and I'm going to build one in my bedroom, except mine will have windows so people can see out, and also maybe a playground at the top, because that would be more fun than just looking at things." Zaria listened to this stream of consciousness planning session while gathering Amara's backpack and art projects, marveling as she did every day at her daughter's ability to find wonder in everything around her. It was a gift Zaria was determined to protect, despite a world that seemed increasingly intent on dimming children's natural light. They were halfway to the parking lot when disaster struck in the form of a backpack zipper that chose that particular moment to surrender to 7 years of dedicated service. Amara's belongings exploded across the sidewalk like educational confetti: homework papers, crayons, a half-eaten granola bar, and the small stuffed elephant that served as her constant companion. "Oh no," Amara wailed, as if the scattered supplies represented a genuine catastrophe rather than a minor inconvenience. "My homework is going to blow away." "It's okay, sweetheart," Zaria said, kneeling to begin the rescue operation. "We'll gather everything up. Nothing's lost." She was reaching for a wayward math worksheet when a pair of expensive Italian leather shoes appeared in her peripheral vision, followed by a familiar voice saying, "Looks like you could use some assistance." Zaria's head snapped up to find Hayden Thorne crouching beside her, already gathering scattered crayons with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems. He had traded his business suit for dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but somehow managed to look completely at ease, collecting a 7-year-old's school supplies from the sidewalk. "Mr. Thorne," Zaria said, her voice carefully neutral despite the acceleration of her pulse. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood for a zoning meeting," he said, depositing the rescued crayons into her outstretched hands. "The community center 2 blocks over is applying for permits to expand their youth programs." Before Zaria could process the implications of Hayden Thorne attending zoning meetings in her neighborhood, Amara's natural curiosity asserted itself. "Who are you?" she asked, with the directness that only children could manage without giving offense. "Are you helping because you're nice, or because you know my mama?" Hayden's expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face, erasing the sharp edges of authority and revealing something infinitely more appealing. "I'm helping because your mama is very smart and works very hard, and sometimes smart, hard-working people need a little assistance with backpack emergencies." Amara considered this explanation with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "That's true," she concluded. "Mama is the smartest person in the whole world. She builds beautiful things that last forever and ever." "She does indeed," Hayden agreed, his eyes meeting Zaria's over Amara's head with an expression that made her suddenly self-conscious about her plaster-dusted appearance and the tendril of hair that had escaped her professional bun. "Are you coming to our house for dinner?" Amara asked, with the casual assumption that all interesting adults would naturally want to extend their acquaintance with the Coleman family. "Amara," Zaria said quickly, heat rising in her cheeks, "Mr. Thorne has his own dinner plans." "Actually," Hayden said, standing and brushing dust from his jeans, "I don't, but I wouldn't want to impose on your evening." There was something in his tone, a carefully casual quality that suggested the invitation mattered more than he was willing to admit. Zaria found herself caught between the practical wisdom of maintaining professional boundaries and the dangerous flutter of possibility that his presence seemed to inspire. "We're having spaghetti and meatballs," Amara announced, apparently taking his interest as an established fact. "And Grandma Ruby is coming over to help with my school project about DC landmarks. She knows everything about Washington because she's lived here her whole entire life, which is like 100 years. 52 years, Zaria corrected automatically, then realized she was essentially providing her mother's biography to a man she had known for exactly 3 days. "Grandma Ruby sounds like a fascinating woman," Hayden said with apparent sincerity. "I'd love to meet her sometime." The casual way he inserted himself into the hypothetical future of her family life sent warning signals through Zaria's carefully constructed defenses. This was exactly how it started. The gradual erosion of boundaries, the slow blending of professional and personal, until you found yourself emotionally invested in someone whose world was fundamentally incompatible with your own. Perhaps another. "Untime," she said firmly, shouldering Amara's rescued backpack and taking her daughter's hand. "We should go. It's getting late." "Of course," Hayden said, but something in his expression suggested this was merely a tactical retreat rather than a surrender. "Drive safely, Ms. Coleman." As they walked toward her car, Amara maintained an uncharacteristic silence that lasted exactly until they were out of earshot. "Mama," she said thoughtfully, "that man likes you. He's a business associate, baby girl. Nothing more." "Uh-huh," Amara said with the skeptical tone she had inherited from her grandmother. "That's why he was looking at you the same way Daddy looks at chocolate cake." Zaria nearly stumbled over her own feet. "Where did you learn to notice things like that?" "Grandma Ruby says paying attention to how people look at each other is important for understanding grown-up feelings," Amara said matter-of-factly. "She also says you work too hard and need someone to remind you to have fun sometimes." As they reached the car, Zaria glanced back to see Hayden still standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. For just a moment, she allowed herself to wonder what it might be, like to let someone into the carefully guarded world she had built around herself and Amara. Then she remembered exactly why she had built those walls in the first place. But the wondering followed her all the way home, persistent as a half-remembered song that refused to fade. Chapter 4. The Fall from Grace. The call came at 11:47 on a Thursday night, shattering the peaceful quiet of Zaria's Anacostia apartment like glass against concrete. She had been grading blueprints at her kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea growing cold beside her elbow while Amara slept soundly in the next room. The restoration timeline for the Meridian house had accelerated unexpectedly, requiring her to approve material specifications that couldn't wait for normal business hours. It was the kind of dedication that had built her reputation and secured their comfortable life, even if it meant sacrificing sleep more often than she preferred. The phone display showed an unknown number with a DC area code. Zaria normally ignored such calls after business hours, but something, instinct perhaps, or the persistent urgency of the ring, made her answer. "Zaria?" The voice was unmistakably Hayden's, though stripped of its usual confidence and authority. He sounded exhausted, perhaps even defeated. "I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else." "Mr. Thorne." Zaria set down her red pen, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" A long pause, filled with what sounded like traffic noise and the distant murmur of voices. "Are you near a television or computer?" "I can be. Why?" "The story broke an hour ago. It's everywhere by now." Zaria crossed to her laptop, pulling up the Washington Post website with growing unease. The headline that greeted her felt like a physical blow. "Thorne Development Scandal. Federal Investigation Targets Construction Empire." Below it, a smaller subheading, "Partners Alleged Fraud Threatens $800 million Company." She scrolled through the article with mounting horror, taking in phrases like wire fraud, falsified environmental reports, and criminal conspiracy. The investigation centered on Marcus Webb, Hayden's business partner of 8 years, who had apparently been systematically falsifying safety inspections and bribing government officials to approve substandard construction materials. "Hayden," she said softly, abandoning professional formality without conscious thought. "Are you involved in any of this?" "No." The word carried absolute conviction. "I had no idea what Marcus was doing, but it doesn't matter. The company is finished. Every project is under federal review. The bank froze our assets this afternoon. Investors are fleeing like the building's on fire." Zaria sank into her desk chair, processing the implications. "Where are you now?" "Standing outside what used to be my penthouse. The FBI finished searching it 2 hours ago. They took everything, computers, files, personal papers. Turns out, when your business partner commits federal crimes, even your home becomes evidence." The devastation in his voice cut through her professional reserve like a blade. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" "I'll figure something out. That's not why I called." Another pause, longer this time. "Zaria, I know this complicates everything. The Meridian House project, our working relationship. I understand if you need to distance yourself from this situation." She stared at the laptop screen, where the article continued with devastating detail about the scope of the investigation and the potential criminal charges facing everyone associated with Thorne Development. By morning, Hayden's face would be on every news program in the city, his reputation destroyed by association with crimes he apparently never committed. "The project specifications are solid," she heard herself saying. All the permits were obtained through proper channels. There's no reason the restoration can't continue under new ownership. New ownership, he repeated with bitter humor. Yes, I suppose that's inevitable. Zaria closed the laptop, unable to bear reading any more about the destruction of a man she was only beginning to understand. Hayden, about that dinner invitation. Forget I mentioned it. You were right to keep things professional. Getting involved with me now would be career suicide. Actually, she said, surprising herself, I was going to say that my offer stands. If you need somewhere to think, to figure out your next steps, Amara and I have a guest room. It's not much, but it's clean and quiet. The silence stretched so long, she wondered if the call had disconnected. Then, you would do that, even knowing what this association might cost you. Zaria thought about the question seriously, weighing professional caution against human compassion. The smart choice was obvious. Maintain distance, protect her reputation, focus on salvaging what she could from the wreckage. But wisdom and kindness didn't always align, and sometimes the heart demanded actions the mind couldn't justify. Everyone deserves a safe place to fall apart, she said finally. If you need that place to be here, the door is open. Another long pause. I don't understand you, Zaria Coleman. That makes two of us. She gave him her address and ended the call, then sat in the sudden quiet of her kitchen, wondering what force of temporary insanity had just compelled her to invite a man she barely knew, a man whose life was currently exploding in spectacular fashion into the sanctuary she had built for herself and her daughter. 40 minutes later, a soft knock at her door announced Hayden's arrival. When she opened it, she barely recognized the confident businessman she had sparred with over construction timelines. This man looked hollowed out, his expensive clothes rumpled and his eyes carrying the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire world had shifted without warning. He carried a single leather overnight bag and what appeared to be a bottle of very expensive wine. I brought this, he said, holding up the bottle awkwardly. Seemed like the least I could do. Though given the circumstances, you might prefer to save it until I'm no longer a federal fugitive. You're not a fugitive, Zaria said, stepping aside to let him enter. You're an innocent man whose partner made terrible choices. There's a difference. The court of public opinion doesn't typically recognize that distinction. Zaria led him to the living room, gesturing toward the comfortable sectional sofa that dominated the modest space. The apartment was small but carefully arranged, filled with Amara's artwork and evidence of their quiet, ordered life. She had lived here for 5 years, transforming the basic 2-bedroom unit into something approaching a home through strategic furniture placement and weekend flea market discoveries. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? She paused, considering his probable state of mind. Something stronger. Coffee would be good. I have a feeling sleep isn't happening tonight. While she prepared the coffee, Hayden examined the photographs covering her refrigerator. Amara's. School pictures, vacation snapshots, candid moments that captured the easy joy of their small family. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, he was studying a picture of Amara in a Halloween costume from the previous year. Wonder Woman, he observed with the first genuine smile she had seen from him all evening. Excellent choice. It was. And her idea, she said Wonder Woman fights for justice and protects people who can't protect themselves. Zaria settled onto the opposite end of the sofa, maintaining careful distance. 7-year-old moral clarity. Must be nice, Hayden said, accepting the coffee gratefully, having that kind of certainty about right and wrong. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, drinking coffee and contemplating the ruins of the day. Finally, Hayden spoke again. There's something else, he said quietly. Something I should probably tell you." Zaria's stomach tightened. "What?" "I've been offered a position, teaching position actually. Georgetown's business school wants me to develop a curriculum on ethical construction practices." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Apparently, my recent experience with the consequences of unethical practices makes me uniquely qualified to discuss the topic." "That's good news, isn't it? A chance to rebuild. It would mean starting over completely. No money, no properties, no empire to inherit, just a professor's salary and whatever credibility I can salvage from this disaster." Zaria studied his profile in the dim lamplight, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands gripped the coffee mug like an anchor. "What does your family think about this career change?" "They're not speaking to me at the moment. Apparently, bringing scandal to the Thorn name is unforgivable, even when you're the victim rather than the perpetrator." He met her eyes with rueful honesty. "Turns out family loyalty has its limits when federal investigations are involved." The casual way he mentioned his family's abandonment hit Zaria like a physical blow. She couldn't imagine turning her back on someone she loved, regardless of circumstances beyond their control. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it completely. "Don't be. It's clarifying, actually. Helps you understand who people really are when the walls come down." As if summoned by their conversation, a soft sound from the hallway announced Amara's emergence from her bedroom, rubbing sleepy eyes and clutching her stuffed elephant. "Mama," she said in the small voice she used when uncertain. "I heard talking." "It's okay, baby girl. We have a guest, Mr. Thorn from the construction site." Amara blinked in the direction of the sofa, gradually focusing on Hayden's familiar face. Instead of shyness or concern, her expression brightened with pleased recognition. "Oh, the nice man who helped with my backpack." She padded across the room without hesitation, apparently considering his presence a delightful surprise rather than an intrusion. "Are you having a sleepover?" "Something like that," Hayden said gently. "I hope that's okay with you." "It's very okay," Amara declared with the generous hospitality that made Zaria's heart swell with pride. "We can have pancakes for breakfast, and I can show you my room, and maybe you can help me with my monument project." "I'd like that very much," Hayden said, and Zaria was startled by the genuine warmth in his voice. "What kind of monument are you building?" "A tower for birds," Amara announced, as if this were the most logical thing in the world. "With little apartments inside, so different kinds of birds can be neighbors and share things." "That sounds like the best kind of monument," Hayden said seriously. "Beautiful and useful." As Zaria tucked Amara back into bed, she found herself watching the gentle way Hayden had interacted with her daughter. No condescension, no awkward attempts to manufacture child-appropriate conversation, just natural kindness and genuine interest in a 7-year-old's architectural ambitions. When she returned to the living room, he was standing at the window, looking out at the quiet street, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said without turning around. For believing I'm not the villain in this story." "Everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt," Zaria said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew they didn't capture the full truth of why she had opened her door to him. The real truth was more complicated, more dangerous. Somewhere between their first collision and this moment of unexpected intimacy, Hayden Thorn had stopped being merely a client and become something she wasn't quite ready to name. But as she watched him, standing in her living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life she had built through determination and careful choices, one thing became absolutely clear. Whatever happened next would change everything. Chapter 5. Unlikely Family. 3 weeks into November, Zaria's carefully ordered life had been thoroughly revolutionized by the presence of a fallen billionaire who made pancakes like a short-order cook and approached seven-year-old logic puzzles with the same intensity he had once brought to million-dollar construction deals. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. What began as a temporary arrangement, a safe harbor while Hayden navigated the legal aftermath of his partner's crimes, had evolved into something that felt dangerously close to domestic bliss. The guest room no longer felt like a guest room. It had become Hayden's space, marked by his reading glasses on the nightstand and the legal documents that covered every available surface as he worked with attorneys to untangle 8 years of fraudulent business practices. More significantly, Amara had claimed him as her personal project, determined to educate him in the essential skills of proper neighborhood living. Under her enthusiastic tutelage, he had mastered the intricacies of the metro system, discovered the best corner store for emergency milk runs, and learned to appreciate the specific joy of Saturday morning cartoons consumed in pajamas with chocolate chip pancakes. Zaria had never seen anything quite like it. This billion-dollar businessman sitting cross-legged on her living room floor, helping Amara construct an elaborate monument to interspecies friendship using cardboard tubes and construction paper, debating with perfect seriousness whether the bird apartments should have balconies or just regular windows. Balconies are more expensive, Amara had explained during one particularly intense architectural discussion. But they make the birds happier because they can sit outside and visit with their neighbors. Happiness is worth the extra cost, Hayden had replied without hesitation. Good architecture should serve the soul as well as the body. It was this version of Hayden, patient, thoughtful, utterly present in whatever moment he occupied, that had begun to crack the careful walls Zaria had built around her heart. Not the wealthy developer with his expensive suits and commanding presence, but this man who listened to a 7-year-old's dreams with complete attention and somehow made grocery shopping feel like an adventure worth documenting. The evening everything changed, began like any other. Zaria had returned from the construction site to find Hayden and Amara in the kitchen, collaborating on what appeared to be an ambitious dinner experiment involving her grandmother Ruby's sweet potato recipe and several cooking techniques that definitely weren't in the original instructions. "We're making improvements," Amara announced, covered in flour and radiating satisfaction. "Hayden says cooking is just construction with food." "That's actually not wrong," Zaria said, surveying the controlled chaos that had once been her organized kitchen. Every pot seemed to be in use, and there were mysterious ingredients scattered across the counter that she was fairly certain hadn't been in her pantry that morning. "I may have gotten carried away," Hayden admitted, looking faintly embarrassed as he stirred something that smelled incredible but definitely wasn't standard sweet potato casserole. "Amara mentioned her grandmother's recipe, and I thought maybe we could surprise her when she arrives." "Grandma Ruby is coming tonight?" Zaria set down her work bag, suddenly conscious of her appearance after a long day managing temperamental contractors. "She didn't tell me." "She called this afternoon," Amara said, apparently having appointed herself the household's social coordinator. "She said she wanted to meet our house guest properly, instead of just hearing about him from other people who might not tell the story right." Zaria felt her stomach drop slightly. Ruby Coleman possessed an uncanny ability to see through people's carefully constructed facades, a talent that had served her well during 30 years of teaching middle school in DC's public schools. More importantly, she had very specific opinions about the type of men who deserved access to her daughter and granddaughter's lives. "When did she say she was coming?" Zaria asked, already calculating how much time she had to prepare Hayden for the full force of Ruby's maternal interrogation. She should be here any minute, Hayden said, consulting his watch. Don't worry, I've been practicing my answers to grandmother-level questions all afternoon. Before Zarya could ask what that meant, a familiar knock echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp raps followed by 2 softer ones, Ruby's signature announcement that had been making Amara giggle. Since she was old enough to recognize patterns, Grandma Ruby, Amara abandoned her cooking duties and raced toward the front door, leaving Zarya and Hayden to face each other across the flour-dusted kitchen. "Any last-minute advice?" he asked, with the expression of a man about to face a firing squad. "Don't try to impress her," Zarya said quickly. "She can smell artifice from 3 blocks away. Just be yourself." "Right," Hayden said, straightening his shoulders. "No pressure at all." Ruby Coleman's entrance into any space was an event worth witnessing. At 52, she possessed the kind of timeless beauty that suggested she had been stunning at 20 and would still be turning heads at 70. Her silver-streaked hair was swept into an elegant updo that somehow managed to look both effortless and perfectly styled, and she moved with the confident grace of a woman who had spent decades commanding respect from roomfuls of skeptical teenagers. Tonight, she wore a burgundy wrap dress that Zarya recognized as her mother's favorite meeting new people outfit, the one reserved for parent conferences, first dates, and other occasions requiring the full deployment of Ruby Coleman's considerable personal presence. "Well, well," Ruby said, her warm brown eyes taking in the domestic scene with obvious amusement. "Look what we have here, a man who cooks and a granddaughter covered in evidence of actual learning. This is already more promising than most situations." She embraced Amara with the fierce affection reserved for grandmothers everywhere, then turned her attention to Hayden with the assessing gaze of a woman accustomed to evaluating character quickly and accurately. "You must be Mr. Thorne," she said, extending a graceful hand. "I'm Ruby Coleman, and I believe you've been taking excellent care of my girls." "Mrs. Coleman," Hayden said, accepting her handshake with careful respect. "Thank you for welcoming me into your family's home. I know this situation is unconventional." "Honey," Ruby said with a laugh that transformed her entire face. "Unconventional is just another word for interesting. And I've been waiting 52 years for my daughter to bring home someone interesting." "Mother," Zarya said with the long-suffering tone of daughters everywhere, "we're not." "Of course not, baby girl," Ruby said with exaggerated innocence. "Just 2 professional colleagues sharing living space and raising a child together. Happens all the time in the architecture business, I'm sure." Hayden cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should focus on dinner. Amara and I were attempting to recreate your sweet potato recipe, though I suspect we may have taken some creative liberties." "Creative liberties," Ruby repeated, moving to inspect their culinary efforts with the focused attention of a food critic. "Interesting phrase. What kind of liberties are we talking about?" What followed was perhaps the most entertaining cooking lesson Zarya had ever witnessed. Ruby examined their modifications with scientific precision, asking pointed questions about technique and reasoning, while Amara provided enthusiastic commentary on every decision. "So you added bourbon to the sweet potatoes," Ruby observed, stirring the mixture thoughtfully, "and cardamom to the spice blend, plus what appears to be a pecan praline topping that definitely wasn't in my original recipe." "I thought the flavors would complement each other," Hayden said, with the careful tone of a student presenting a thesis to a particularly demanding professor. "And Amara mentioned you like pecans." "I do like pecans," Ruby agreed, "and bourbon, and men who pay attention to details that matter to the women in their lives." The approval in her voice was subtle but unmistakable, and Zarya felt something flutter in her chest that she absolutely refused to examine too closely. Dinner was a revelation. The improved sweet potato casserole was genuinely exceptional, and the easy conversation that flowed between the four of them felt like something she had been missing without realizing it. Hayden held his own against Ruby's gentle interrogation, answering questions about his family, his work, and his plans for the future, with the kind of honest directness that gradually earned her mother's respect. "So what happens next?" Ruby asked as they cleared the dinner dishes. "When all this legal business is settled and you're ready to start over?" "I'm not sure yet," Hayden admitted. "The teaching position at Georgetown is a possibility, but it would mean completely changing the trajectory of my life, starting over from the beginning." "Starting over isn't always a bad thing," Ruby said thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need." Later, after Amara had been tucked into bed with promises of pancakes in the morning, the three adults settled in the living room with coffee and the comfortable exhaustion of a successful evening. "I like him," Ruby announced without preamble, as if Hayden weren't sitting 3 feet away. "He's got good hands for a rich man." "Former rich man," Hayden corrected with self-deprecating humor. "Money comes and goes," Ruby said dismissively. "Character is permanent, and a man who spends 3 hours helping a 7-year-old perfect her bird apartment blueprints has character worth investing in." She turned to Zaria with the pointed look that meant serious maternal business was about to be conducted. "Baby girl, you've been scared of letting anyone close since Amara's father proved that handsome and reliable don't always travel together. But fear is a poor foundation for life decisions." "Mother," Zaria protested, heat rising in her cheeks. "This isn't... We're not discussing..." "We're discussing the fact that you've been happier in the past 3 weeks than I've seen you in 3 years, Ruby said with characteristic directness. "And that little girl in there talks about when Hayden comes home, like he belongs here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Zaria to confront truths she had been carefully avoiding. The truth was that somewhere between shared grocery runs and collaborative cooking experiments, Hayden had begun to feel less like a house guest and more like family. "Ruby's right," Hayden said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Zaria's pulse quicken. "About Amara, I mean. She does talk about me like I belong here, and the terrifying thing is, I'm starting to feel like maybe I do." Their eyes met across the coffee table, and Zaria felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble. Under the weight of possibility, this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to fall for a man whose life was currently in chaos, whose future remained uncertain, whose very presence in her world represented everything she had learned to avoid. But as she looked at Hayden, really looked at him, past the surface complications, to the man who had spent the evening making her daughter laugh and her mother feel cherished, she realized that sometimes the heart refused to follow the mind's sensible advice. "Maybe you do," as she heard herself saying, the words emerging before wisdom could stop them. Ruby smiled with the satisfaction of a woman whose instincts had once again proven correct. And somewhere in the space between confession and possibility, everything changed. The future remained uncertain, filled with legal proceedings and financial complications, and the 1,000 small challenges that came with rebuilding a life from the ground up. But for tonight, sitting in her living room with a man who made pancakes like poetry and a mother who saw through facades to the soul beneath, Zaria allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Even the ones that scared her most. Chapter 6. Family Interference. December arrived in Washington, D.C., with the kind of brutal clarity that stripped leaves from trees and illusions from comfortable situations. And the first sign of trouble came in the form of an unexpected visitor on a frigid Tuesday morning. Zaria had left early for a site meeting with the Historical Preservation Committee, kissing Amara goodbye and reminding Hayden about the parent-teacher conference scheduled for Thursday evening. Their morning routine had become seamlessly domestic over the past month. Coffee shared in comfortable silence, logistics coordinated with the efficiency of people who genuinely cared about each other's lives, small touches that spoke of intimacy. Without demanding definition, she was reviewing structural modifications with the committee's engineering consultant when her phone buzzed with a text from Hayden. Unexpected visitors. May need backup later. 20 minutes later, a second message. Definitely need backup. Zaria's stomach tightened with foreboding. In the 6 weeks since Hayden had been living with them, his family had maintained radio silence, no calls, no visits, no acknowledgement of his existence beyond what their attorneys required for the ongoing federal investigation. She had assumed this neglect was permanent, a casualty of scandal and damaged social standing. Apparently, she had assumed wrong. The scene that greeted her when she arrived home early from work looked like a hostile takeover orchestrated by people who shopped exclusively at stores that didn't display prices. Victoria Thorne stood in Zaria's modest living room like a disapproving queen surveying a peasant village. Her perfectly tailored St. John suit and flawless silver hair broadcasting wealth and authority with every carefully controlled breath. Beside her, Preston Thorne radiated the quiet menace of a man accustomed to getting his way through applications of money and influence rather than raised voices. He was examining Amara's artwork on the refrigerator with the expression of someone discovering evidence of a communicable disease. Evangeline completed the family tableau, perched on the edge of Zaria's sectional sofa as if afraid prolonged contact might contaminate her designer ensemble. She held a cup of what appeared to be Zaria's good coffee, sipping it with the martyred expression of someone suffering through inferior accommodations for the greater good. Hayden stood near the window with his arms crossed, his jaw tight with barely controlled frustration. When he saw Zaria enter, relief flooded his features. "Zaria," Victoria said before anyone else could speak, her voice carrying the crisp authority of a woman who expected immediate attention. "How lovely to finally meet you. Hayden has told us absolutely nothing about his living arrangements." The pause before living arrangements contained enough disapproval to power the Washington Monument, and Zaria felt her professional smile falter slightly. "Mrs. Thorne," she said carefully, moving to stand beside Hayden in what she hoped appeared to be casual solidarity rather than defensive positioning. "This is unexpected. We felt it was time for a family conversation," Preston said, his tone suggesting this conversation would be conducted on terms he had already predetermined. About Hayden's future and the unfortunate choices that led to his current circumstances. "Unfortunate choices," Hayden repeated with dangerous quiet. "You mean like trusting a business partner who turned out to be embezzling funds? Or perhaps you're referring to my choice not to flee the country when the investigation began." "We're referring to your choice to abandon your responsibilities to this family," Evangeline said sharply, speaking for the first time since Zaria's arrival. "Do you have any idea what this scandal has done to our reputation? Mother can barely show her face at the country club." "My heart bleeds," Hayden said with withering sarcasm. Victoria raised a perfectly manicured hand to silence the brewing argument. "Enough. We're not here to relitigate the past. We're here to discuss solutions for the future." She turned her attention to Zaria with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing to remove a malignant tumor. "Miss Coleman, I'm sure you're a lovely person in your own way, but surely you understand that this arrangement isn't sustainable. Hayden has obligations to his family, to his heritage, to the business empire his grandfather built from nothing. What business empire? Hayden asked with bitter humor. In case you've forgotten, the FBI seized everything 6 weeks ago. There is no empire. There are no obligations except the ones I choose to honor. There will be again, Preston said with absolute confidence. We've been in discussions with our attorneys and financial advisors. The assets can be recovered, the business rebuilt, the family name restored. But only if you stop this ridiculous charade and return to your proper place in society. Zaria felt something cold settle in her stomach as she began to understand the true purpose of this visit. This wasn't a family reconciliation, it was a campaign to reclaim what the Thorns considered their property. And what exactly would constitute my proper place? Hayden asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Georgetown Townhouse, Evangeline said, consulting notes on her phone as if reading from a shopping list. Full restoration of your social connections. Re-entry into appropriate circles. Marriage to someone who understands the responsibilities that come with the Thorn name. The word marriage hung in the air like a blade, and Zaria felt her carefully controlled composure begin to fracture. Marriage, she repeated, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Catherine Whitmore, Victoria said with obvious satisfaction. Senator Whitmore's daughter. Graduated summa cum laude from Yale, spent 2 years with Doctors Without Borders, currently finishing her residency at Johns Hopkins. Beautiful, accomplished, and most importantly, she understands the complexities of public life. Zaria's hands clenched involuntarily. She had met Catherine Whitmore at various D.C. social functions, a stunning blonde with impeccable credentials and the kind of effortless grace that came from generations of breeding and preparation for exactly this type of advantageous marriage. Catherine is a lovely woman, Hayden said carefully, who deserves better than a marriage of convenience designed to rehabilitate my family's reputation. It wouldn't be convenience, Preston said matter-of-factly. You dated her for 8 months before this mess began. She's already indicated her willingness to overlook recent complications if you're prepared to make a genuine commitment. The revelation hit Zaria like physical blow. Hayden had never mentioned Catherine Whitmore, never suggested there was anyone in his past who might have legitimate claims on his future. She felt suddenly foolish for assuming she knew him well enough to trust her heart to his care. That was 2 years ago, Hayden said, his voice carrying a warning note. Before I understood what I actually wanted from life. What you want is irrelevant, Victoria said with chilling practicality. What matters is what's best for this family and your long-term security. Do you honestly believe this domestic fantasy can last? What happens when the novelty wears off and you're faced with the reality of a middle-class life in a neighborhood that doesn't even have proper security? Her contemptuous gaze swept the apartment, cataloging every piece of second-hand furniture and discount store decoration as evidence of Zaria's fundamental inadequacy. What happens, she continued relentlessly, when you want to send that child to private school and realize you can't afford the tuition, when you want to take a vacation and discover that teachers' salaries don't stretch to include luxury resorts, when you're 50 years old and still worrying about mortgage payments and health insurance? Each question landed with surgical precision, designed to expose the practical impossibility of the life Hayden was trying to build. Zaria felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger, hating herself for the small voice in her head that whispered these concerns might be valid. Money isn't everything, she said finally, her voice tight with controlled fury. Spoken like someone who's never had enough to understand its importance, Evangeline said with casual cruelty. It's easy to romanticize poverty when you've never experienced real wealth. Evangeline, Hayden's voice carried a dangerous edge that made his sister step back slightly. "That's enough." "No, it's not enough," Preston said, moving to stand beside his wife in a show of united family authority. "We've indulged this rebellion long enough. It's time for hard truths and practical decisions." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, placing it on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "Full financial restoration, complete legal support for the ongoing investigation, re-establishment of your social position, all contingent on your immediate return to appropriate living arrangements and serious consideration of marriage to Catherine." The envelope sat between them like a loaded weapon, representing everything Hayden had lost and everything the Thorne family was prepared to restore. All he had to do was walk away from the life he had been building in this modest apartment, with a woman and child who had given him sanctuary when his own blood relatives had abandoned him. "And if I refuse?" Hayden asked quietly. Victoria's smile was as cold as the December wind outside. "Then you'll discover exactly how much your principles are worth when you're 40 years old and starting over with nothing." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere of the home Zaria had worked so hard to create. She looked at Hayden's face, searching for some sign of his decision, some indication that the past 6 weeks had meant more to him than the prospect of restored wealth and social standing. What she saw there made her heart sink like a stone in deep water, because for just a moment, barely perceptible but unmistakably present, she glimpsed uncertainty in his eyes. The flicker of a man calculating odds and weighing possibilities, considering whether love was worth the price of permanent exile from everything he had ever known. It lasted only seconds before his expression hardened with resolve. But those seconds told Zaria everything she needed to know about the fundamental fragility of the happiness she had been foolish enough to believe might last. "I need time to think," Hayden said finally, and even though his words were directed at his family, Zaria felt them like a betrayal she should have seen coming, because she had been here before, had made the mistake of believing that when it came to choosing between love and security, between heart and heritage, love would always win. She was learning once again how naive that belief truly was. Chapter 7. The Christmas Betrayal. Christmas Eve morning dawned grey and bitter in Washington, D.C., the kind of weather that matched the Arctic atmosphere that had settled over Zaria's apartment in the 3 weeks since the Thorne family intervention. The countdown to disaster had been subtle, but relentless. Hayden still helped Amara with homework, still made pancakes on Saturday mornings, still kissed Zaria goodnight with apparent tenderness. But underneath the familiar routines, something fundamental had shifted. Phone calls taken in hushed voices, behind closed doors, unexplained absences that stretched longer each day, a growing distance in his eyes that no amount of forced normalcy could bridge. Zaria had watched it happening with the sick fascination of someone witnessing a slow-motion car accident, knowing the impact was inevitable, but powerless to prevent it. She had tried confronting him directly, demanding honesty about his family's ultimatum and his intentions for their future. But Hayden had become a master of deflection, offering reassurances that felt increasingly hollow and promises that rang like counterfeit coins. Now, standing in her kitchen while Amara decorated sugar cookies with enough enthusiasm to power the national Christmas tree, Zaria felt the weight of impending loss like a physical ache in her chest. "Mama, look!" Amara held up a star-shaped cookie covered in so much red icing it resembled abstract art. "This one is for Hayden to take to his family's party tonight." Zaria's hand stilled on the coffee mug she'd been washing. "What party, baby girl?" "The Christmas party at his family's big house. He told me about it yesterday when you were at work." He said it's a fancy party with lots of important people and a really big Christmas tree. The mug slipped from Zaria's nerveless fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor in an explosion of ceramic and cold coffee. She stood frozen, staring at the wreckage while her mind processed the implications of what Amara had just revealed. "Mama?" Amara's voice carried concern. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Zaria managed, kneeling to gather the larger pieces while her heart hammered against her ribs. "You didn't do anything wrong. Tell me more about this party." "Well, Hayden said his family wants him to come home for Christmas. And he thought maybe we could go too. But then he said it might be better if just he went first, to make sure everyone would be nice to us." Amara's 7-year-old logic made the betrayal sound almost reasonable. He said after Christmas we could all visit together when everyone isn't so busy with party things. Each word landed like a physical blow. Hayden had been planning this, had been discussing it with her daughter while deliberately keeping her in the dark. The calculated deception felt worse than an outright lie, because it demonstrated the care he had taken to manage the situation without consulting the people whose lives would be most affected by his choices. "Where is Hayden now?" Zaria asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "In his room, getting ready. He said he needs to look extra nice because first impressions are important." Amara paused in her cookie decorating, studying her mother's face with the perceptive gaze that missed nothing. "Mama, why do you look sad?" Before Zaria could formulate an answer that wouldn't traumatize her daughter, Hayden emerged from the guest room, wearing a charcoal grey suit that she hadn't seen since his business empire days. He had clearly put considerable effort into his appearance. Fresh haircut, expensive watch, the kind of polished presentation that belonged in boardrooms and country clubs rather than modest Anacostia apartments. He looked like the man she had first collided with outside the Kennedy Center, all sharp edges and unconscious privilege, and the transformation hit her like a glimpse of an unwelcome future. "You look very handsome," Amara announced, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. "Are you excited about the party?" "Thank you, sweetheart," Hayden said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I should be back late tonight. Don't wait up." The casual dismissal, the assumption that she would simply accept his unexplained absence on Christmas Eve, ignited the anger Zaria had been carefully suppressing for weeks. "Amara," she said quietly, "why don't you take your cookies to your room? You can finish decorating them while Mama and Hayden have a grown-up conversation." Something in her tone must have warned Amara that this conversation wouldn't be pleasant, because she gathered her cookies without argument and disappeared down the hallway with the efficiency of a child who had learned to recognize when adults needed privacy for difficult discussions. "When were you planning to tell me?" Zaria asked once they were alone. Hayden had the grace to look ashamed, though he didn't attempt to deny what she had discovered. "I was going to talk to you tonight when I got home." "After the fact. After you had already made your choice and presented me with the results." "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "This is just reconnaissance. My family has been pressuring me for weeks, and I thought if I could just see them, talk to them face to face, maybe I could make them understand." "Understand what, exactly?" Zaria's voice carried a dangerous edge. "That you've been slumming in Anacostia, that your experiment in poverty has been educational, but you're ready to return to your real life now? That's not fair, isn't it?" She moved closer, studying his face with the same intensity she brought to architectural plans. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like a man hedging his bets, keeping his options open, making sure he has somewhere to land when this domestic fantasy becomes inconvenient. Zaria, please, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "Am I? Because it seems pretty simple to me. Either you want to be here with us, or you want to be there with them. Either this is your life, or it's a temporary distraction while you figure out what you really want. Hayden ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, and for a moment she glimpsed the vulnerable man who had stood in her doorway 6 weeks ago, broken and desperate for sanctuary. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love Amara. I love the life we've built here, but my family, they're offering me everything back, my business, my reputation, my future. How can I not at least consider what that means?" "What it means," Zarya said with devastating clarity, "is that everything we've shared has been conditional, temporary, something you were willing to try until a better offer came along." "That's not true." "Then don't go." The words hung between them like a test, and Zarya saw the exact moment when Hayden failed it. The hesitation in his eyes, the calculation that weighed her love against his family's ultimatum, the fundamental uncertainty about whether what they had built together was worth the sacrifice his family demanded. "I have to," he said finally. "But this doesn't change anything between us. I'll be back tonight, and we can talk about everything then." "No," Zarya said quietly. "You won't." "What do you mean?" She looked at him with the clarity that comes from finally understanding a situation completely. "I mean that when you walk out that door in your expensive suit to attend your family's party, you're making a choice, and it's not us." "Zarya, take Amara with you." The words emerged from some primal protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. If Hayden was determined to explore his options with his family, he needed to understand that those options included responsibility for the child who had come to see him as a father figure. "What? If you're serious about us being a family, then we don't spend Christmas Eve apart. Take Amara to your family's party. Let them meet the little girl who thinks you hung the moon. Show them exactly what you'll be walking away from if you choose them over us." Hayden's face went pale. "I don't think that's a good idea. My family can be difficult, and it's a formal event, not really appropriate for children." "I see." Zarya felt something crucial break inside her chest, like a support beam finally succumbing to too much weight. "So when you picture your future with them, Amara isn't part of it?" "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." She moved toward the hallway, needing distance from the wreckage of her hopes. "Take her with you, Hayden. If we matter to you the way you claim we do, then prove it. Zarya, please be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For the first time in weeks, I'm seeing this situation clearly." She turned back to face him one final time. "Take my daughter to your family's Christmas party, or don't come back to this apartment. Those are your choices." She left him standing in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. Amara's artwork, shared photographs, the comfortable debris of 6 weeks spent learning to be a family. When she heard the front door close 20 minutes later, she knew with absolute certainty that he had made his choice. The only question was whether he had taken Amara with him, or whether she was about to discover that even the love of a 7-year-old wasn't enough to compete with the promise of restored wealth and social position. The answer came in the form of excited voices from the guest room, where Amara was apparently helping Hayden select appropriate accessories for her first fancy party. "Mama!" Amara called out, her voice bright with anticipation. "Come see how pretty I look." Zarya closed her eyes and leaned against the kitchen. A counter, feeling the weight of the choice she had just forced him to make. She had given him a test designed to reveal his true priorities, and now she would have to live with the consequences of whatever those priorities turned out to be. But as she heard her daughter's laughter echoing from the guest room, accompanied by Hayden's gentle voice explaining the importance of Christmas party etiquette, Zarya realized she had miscalculated something crucial. She had assumed that if Hayden truly loved them, he would never expose Amara to his family's judgment and hostility. She had never considered the possibility that he might be selfish enough to take her anyway. Chapter 8. Mama Bear Unleashed. The silence that followed Hayden and Amara's departure felt apocalyptic, as if all the sound had been sucked from the world, along with Zaria's ability to breathe normally. She stood at her living room window, watching the empty street and fighting the urge to call Ruby, to call the police, to call anyone who might help her understand how she had just voluntarily sent her 7-year-old daughter into what she suspected might be hostile territory. The rational part of her mind insisted that Hayden would never allow genuine harm to come to Amara, but the protective mother in her was screaming warnings about aristocratic families and their capacity for casual cruelty toward people they considered beneath their notice. By 7 o'clock, she had reorganized every closet in the apartment and stress-cleaned surfaces that were already spotless. By 8, she had called Amara's cell phone, the simple device she carried for emergencies, 4 times, reaching voicemail each time with increasing panic. By 9, she was pacing the length of her living room like a caged animal, alternating between fury and terror in waves that left her nauseated and shaking. At 9:30, her phone finally rang. "Mama!" Amara's voice was small and strange, carrying an undertone that immediately set off every alarm in Zaria's maternal nervous system. "Baby girl, where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm okay. I'm at Hayden's family's house. It's really big, Mama. Like a castle, but not as pretty as the ones in my books." Amara's words came slowly, carefully, as if she were thinking about each one before speaking. "Can you come get me?" The request hit Zaria like a physical blow. Amara had never asked to come home early from any event in her 7 years of life. She was adaptable, social, capable of finding something interesting in almost any situation. Of course I can come get you. What's wrong, sweetheart?" A long pause filled with voices and music in the background. "The people here don't like me very much, and Hayden is different here. He talks different and acts different, like he forgot about our family." Each word felt like a knife turning in Zaria's chest. "Can you tell me where you are exactly? What's the address?" Another pause, longer this time. When Amara spoke again, her voice was even smaller. "I don't know the address, but I asked Hayden if we could call you, and he said not yet, that we need to stay longer so his family can meet me properly. But Mama, I don't think they want to meet me properly. I think they want me to go away." The protective fury that rose in Zaria's throat was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Someone had made her daughter feel unwelcome, unwanted, less than worthy of basic human kindness. Someone had taught her 7-year-old that her presence was an inconvenience rather than a gift. "Listen to me very carefully, baby girl. I want you to find a bathroom or somewhere private where you can talk without anyone hearing you. Can you do that? Okay, hold on." Zaria could hear the sound of Amara moving, doors opening and closing, the background noise fading to a whisper. "I'm in a bathroom. It has a chandelier in it, Mama. A chandelier in a bathroom." Despite everything, Zaria almost smiled. Trust Amara to find wonder, even in the midst of social exile. "Now I need you to tell me exactly where this house is. Look around and tell me everything you can see." For the next 10 minutes, Amara provided a detailed description of the Thorne family mansion that allowed Zaria to identify it as the Georgetown estate she had seen featured in Washington Life magazine. The previous spring, Senator Whitmore's Christmas party, the article had called it, hosted at the historic Thorne residence with its commanding view of the Potomac River. Of course, the same party where Catherine Whitmore would be in attendance, looking stunning and appropriate and everything Zaria could never be in the rarefied world of DC society. "Mama, someone's knocking on the door. I have to go." "Wait!" Zarya said urgently. Baby girl, I want you to remember something very important. You are perfect exactly as you are. You are smart and kind and beautiful, and if anyone makes you feel differently, they're wrong. Do you understand me? I understand. I love you, Mama. I love you too, more than all the stars in the sky. The line went dead, leaving Zarya alone with her rage and a growing determination to retrieve her daughter from whatever nightmare of social humiliation Hayden had exposed her to. It took her 45 minutes to drive from Anacostia to Georgetown. 45 minutes of increasingly murderous thoughts about entitled families and the men who chose them over the people who actually loved them. By the time she pulled up outside the Thorne Mansion, a neoclassical monument to generational wealth that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes, her fury had crystallized into something cold and purposeful. The house blazed, with lights every window illuminated, to showcase the elegant party taking place within. Valets in formal uniforms managed a steady stream of luxury vehicles, while perfectly dressed guests moved between the main house and what appeared to be a winterized garden party in the rear grounds. Zarya sat in her 10-year-old Honda, suddenly conscious of her jeans and sweater in a way that made her skin burn with humiliation and anger. She didn't belong here, would never belong here, and Hayden had known that when he brought Amara into this world of casual exclusion and inherited privilege. But her daughter was inside that house, feeling unwelcome and forgotten, and no amount of social awkwardness was going to prevent Zarya from bringing her home. She bypassed the front entrance with its intimidating doorman and manicured landscape, following a stone path that led around the side of the house toward the rear garden. If she could locate Amara without creating a scene, perhaps they could leave quietly and preserve what remained of everyone's dignity. The path opened onto a terrace that belonged in European royal palaces, vast stone spaces decorated with topiary, and outdoor heaters overlooking formal gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. The Christmas party sprawled across multiple levels, from the main terrace down to a lower garden area where a string quartet provided soundtrack for conversations conducted in the cultured tones of people who had never worried about mortgage, payments, or health insurance. And there, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what appeared to be a grand drawing room, was the scene that would haunt Zarya's dreams for years to come. Amara sat alone on an antique settee that dwarfed her small frame, still wearing the red velvet dress they had chosen together that afternoon. She held her stuffed elephant, the comfort object she rarely brought to public events, clutched against her chest like armor. Her legs dangled from the elegant furniture, too short to reach the floor, and her face carried the careful blankness that children develop when they're trying very hard not to cry in front of strangers. Around her, the party continued with breathtaking indifference. Beautifully dressed adults moved through the room carrying champagne and conversation, stepping around her as if she were a piece of furniture too insignificant to acknowledge. No one spoke to her. No one offered her food or drink. No one seemed to register that a 7-year-old child was sitting alone and forgotten while the adults enjoyed their celebration. And in the center of it all, Hayden stood near an enormous Christmas tree, deep in animated conversation, with a blonde woman in a designer gown who could only be Catherine Whitmore. He was smiling, gesturing with the kind of easy charm Zarya remembered from their early encounters, looking for all the world like a man who had never spent 6 weeks learning to braid a little girl's hair or debate the architectural merits of bird apartments. He had forgotten Amara existed. The realization hit Zarya like a physical blow, followed immediately by a rage so pure and focused it felt like divine intervention. She moved toward the house with predatory purpose, no longer caring about social protocols or appropriate behavior or anything except removing her daughter from this monument to calculated cruelty. The French doors leading from the terrace into the drawing room weren't locked, a testament to the security that wealth could provide. Zaria stepped into the warm, perfumed air of Georgetown society with the quiet determination of a mother whose child had been threatened. The first person to notice her entrance was a distinguished man in his 60s who looked like he belonged on currency. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her casual clothes and obvious working-class origins. But before he could speak, she was already moving toward Amara with single-minded purpose. "Baby girl," she said softly, kneeling beside the settee and opening her arms. Amara's careful composure crumbled instantly. She launched herself into her mother's embrace with the desperate relief of someone who had been rescued from drowning, and Zaria felt the small body trembling against her chest. "I want to go home, Mama," Amara whispered. "I don't like it here." "We're going home right now," Zaria promised, standing and lifting her daughter into her arms. "Right now." It was then that the silence spread through the room like a ripple across still water. Conversations halted mid-sentence as the assembled guests turned to stare at the intruder who had dared to enter their sanctuary uninvited. Zaria felt their attention like a weight, their curiosity and disapproval radiating across the elegant space with palpable force. And finally, inevitably, Hayden looked up from his conversation with Catherine Whitmore and saw them standing there. The expression that crossed his face, surprise, guilt, calculation, and something that might have been relief, told Zaria everything she needed to know about how completely he had compartmentalized his two lives. "Zaria," he said, starting toward them with obvious concern, "what are you doing here?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and something inside Zaria snapped with the finality of a bridge cable under too much weight. "What am I doing here?" she repeated, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. "I'm retrieving my daughter from a party where she's been sitting alone for 3 hours while the adults ignored her existence." A collective intake of breath swept through the assembled guests, and Zaria realized she had just committed the ultimate social sin. She had told the truth in a room designed for comfortable lies. "Now wait just a minute," came a crisp voice from behind her, and Zaria turned to face Victoria Thorne, resplendent in midnight blue silk and righteous indignation. "This is a private event and you are trespassing." "I'm retrieving my child," Zaria said with deadly calm, "who never should have been exposed to this gathering in the first place." Exposed? Preston Thorne materialized beside his wife, his face flushed with what appeared to be genuine outrage. "Young woman, you are speaking about one of Washington's most distinguished social events. I'm speaking about a room full of adults who thought it was acceptable to ignore a 7-year-old child," Zaria shot back. "I'm speaking about people who invited her here as some kind of test or demonstration, then treated her like she was invisible when she didn't meet their standards." The truth of the accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Zaria saw several guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Whatever they had intended when Hayden arrived with Amara, the result had been a room full of sophisticated adults, united in their indifference to a child's comfort and happiness. "That's quite enough," Evangeline Thorne said, stepping forward, with the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of getting her way through sheer force of privilege. "I think you should leave before this situation becomes any more unpleasant." Unpleasant? Zaria felt the last of her restraint evaporate. "You want to see unpleasant? Unpleasant is watching my daughter sit alone and forgotten while you people stand around congratulating yourselves on your sophistication. Unpleasant is realizing that the man I trusted with her care was so desperate to impress you that he forgot she existed." Her gaze found Hayden across the room, and the raw pain in her voice made him flinch visibly. "You brought her here. she continued, her words cutting through the perfumed air like a blade. You convinced her to come to your family's party, made her believe she was welcome, then abandoned her the moment you found more interesting company. Zarya, that's not what happened, Hayden said, finally moving toward them, but she held up a hand to stop his approach. Don't, she said quietly. Don't you dare try to explain this away. She called me Hayden. My 7-year-old daughter called me from a bathroom because she felt so unwelcome that she couldn't even enjoy a party with a chandelier in the bathroom. Despite the tension, several guests looked involuntarily toward the bathroom in question, and Zarya realized that even in her fury, she had inherited Amara's talent for finding the absurd in any situation. The child was perfectly fine, Victoria said dismissively. Children need to learn appropriate behavior for formal events. This was an educational opportunity. Educational, Zarya repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. Let me educate you about something, Mrs. Thorne. My daughter is not a prop in your family's reconciliation drama. She's not a test case for your son's commitment to his real life. She's a little girl who trusted you to treat her with basic human kindness, and you failed completely. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of the string quartet and the whisper of expensive fabric as the assembled guests shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, Zarya continued, gaining momentum, if any of you think that wealth and social position excuse treating a child like an inconvenience, then you're not sophisticated, you're simply cruel. She turned toward the French doors, carrying Amara toward the exit with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at Hayden one final time. When you're finished playing dress-up with people who abandoned you the moment you became inconvenient, she said quietly, don't bother coming home. We'll send your things to whatever address your family provides. And with that, she walked out of the Georgetown mansion and out of Hayden Thorne's life, carrying her daughter toward the car and the future they would build without him. Behind them, the party resumed, with the practiced ease of people accustomed to pretending uncomfortable truths had never been spoken. But in the corner of the grand drawing room, an antique settee sat empty, bearing silent witness to the moment when love proved insufficient to bridge the gap between two incompatible worlds. The war was over, and everyone had lost. Chapter 9. Persistent Pursuit. The new year arrived in Washington, D.C. with the kind of relentless cold that seemed designed to match the emotional climate of Zarya's carefully reconstructed life. And by February, she had almost convinced herself that the daily ache in her chest was simply the natural consequence of a harsh winter rather than the persistent echo of loss. Almost, but not quite. The first attempt at reconciliation came on Valentine's Day, which Zarya had decided to treat as an ordinary Tuesday devoted to the restoration of a 19th-century carriage house in Dupont Circle. She was reviewing thermal imaging reports with the environmental consultant when Michelle approached with the expression of someone bearing potentially explosive news. "There's a delivery for you," Michelle said carefully. A rather extensive delivery. Through the construction site's trailer window, Zarya could see a florist's van, disgorging what appeared to be an entire greenhouse worth of exotic flowers. Orchids in colors she didn't know existed, roses that probably cost more per stem than she spent on groceries in a week, arrangements that belonged in museum displays rather than modest construction offices. The card, when she finally located it among the botanical abundance, contained a single line written in Hayden's unmistakable handwriting. "For the woman who taught me what beauty really means." "Sweet sentiment," Ruby observed later that evening. surveying the floral explosion that had transformed Zaria's apartment into something resembling a luxury hotel lobby. Expensive sentiment too, I'm guessing. Must have cost him more than some people's cars. Money he doesn't actually have, Zaria pointed out, though she couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her voice. Unless his family's reconciliation came with a restored credit line. Probably did, Ruby said, with the pragmatic wisdom that had guided her through 27 years of single motherhood. Rich families don't stay rich by cutting off their own blood, no matter how disappointed they are. They just apply pressure until the wayward member comes back to the fold. Amara, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since Christmas, looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. "Are you going to call him, Mama?" The question was asked with studied casualness, but Zaria caught the note of carefully controlled hope in her daughter's voice. 3 months later, Amara still occasionally asked when Hayden was coming home, still set an extra place at dinner, before remembering it wasn't needed, still saved interesting stories from school to share with someone who was no longer there to hear them. "No, baby girl," Zaria said gently. "Beautiful flowers don't change what happened. They don't make broken promises whole again." That afternoon, she had the flowers delivered to the children's ward at George Washington University Hospital, where they would bring joy to people who genuinely needed it, rather than serving as expensive reminders of poor choices and shattered trust. The second attempt came in March, disguised as professional necessity. Zaria was conducting a final inspection of the Meridian House restoration, now under new ownership and nearly complete, when she discovered Hayden waiting in the building's elegant lobby. He wore the same charcoal suit from Christmas Eve, though it seemed to hang differently now, as if tailored for a man who carried himself with less unconscious authority. "The new owners asked me to review the final specifications," he said without preamble, his voice carefully neutral. "Make sure everything meets the original vision for the project." It was a reasonable explanation, even logical given his extensive knowledge of the building's complex requirements. It was also obviously fabricated, since the new owners, a hotel development company, had been perfectly satisfied with Zaria's detailed progress reports and had never expressed any need for additional consultation. "I see," Zaria said, consulting a clipboard with professional detachment. "And what exactly did you want to review?" For the next hour, they moved through the restored spaces with the kind of focused efficiency that had characterized their early working relationship. Hayden asked intelligent questions about the hardwood floor restoration, offered thoughtful observations about the period lighting installations, and demonstrated the same appreciation for historical preservation that had first impressed her. It wasn't until they reached the building's crown jewel, a restored ballroom, with original chandeliers and hand-painted ceiling murals, that the professional facade finally cracked. "This is extraordinary work," Hayden said softly, studying the intricate plasterwork that had required 6 months of painstaking restoration. "Your team achieved something remarkable here." "Yes," Zaria agreed, "this they did." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying and couldn't take back. In the afternoon light filtering through the ballroom's tall windows, Hayden looked tired, older somehow, as if the past 3 months had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with calendar pages. "Zaria," he said finally, "I need you to know that what happened at Christmas was exactly what I expected to happen," she interrupted, her voice carrying a finality that made him stop mid-sentence. "You made your choice, Hayden. You brought my daughter to a place where she would be judged and found wanting, then forgot about her the moment you found more suitable company. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." "That's not fair. You're not letting me explain." "There's nothing to explain. Your actions spoke louder than any explanation ever could. She gathered her inspection materials and walked toward the exit, leaving him standing alone in the beautiful room they had once planned together, surrounded by the evidence of what they might have accomplished if trust hadn't proved more fragile than century-old plaster. The third attempt was the most painful because it involved exploiting the one weakness in Zaria's carefully constructed defenses, her daughter's forgiving heart. It came in the form of Amara's spring science fair, where her project on sustainable architecture had earned first place in the elementary division. Zaria was photographing the moment when she spotted a familiar figure at the edge of the school gymnasium, hands in his pockets, watching Amara's excited explanation of solar panels and green roofing with the expression of someone witnessing. A miracle! He came, Amara said unnecessarily, her voice bright with vindicated hope. I sent him an invitation, Mama. I know you said not to, but I thought maybe if he saw my project about buildings, he would remember that we're a family that builds things together. The innocent optimism in those words nearly broke Zaria's heart. All over again. Her 7-year-old daughter still believed that love was stronger than circumstance, that good intentions could overcome poor choices, that families were things you chose rather than things that chose you. Baby girl, Zaria said carefully, you can't force people to be part of our lives. They have to want to be here. But he does want to, Amara insisted with the absolute certainty of childhood. Look at how he's looking at my project. Look at how he's looking at us. Against her better judgment, Zaria did look. Hayden stood 20 feet away, his attention focused entirely on Amara's animated description of environmentally conscious construction techniques. When their eyes met across the crowded gymnasium, the longing in his expression was unmistakable, raw, desperate, and utterly genuine. For a moment, Zaria felt her resolve waver. This was the man who had spent hours helping Amara perfect her presentation, who had taught her about load-bearing walls and thermal efficiency, who had made architecture feel like magic rather than mathematics. Then she remembered Christmas Eve, and the moment when all his good intentions had proved insufficient against the weight of family expectation and social pressure. Amara, she said quietly, go get your ribbon and your project. We're going home. But Mama, now, sweetheart. As they gathered Amara's materials, Zaria could feel Hayden's presence at the edge of her peripheral vision, could sense his desire to approach and the careful distance he maintained out of respect for boundaries she had made crystal clear. When they left the gymnasium, he followed them to the parking lot, but stopped short of actual conversation, standing beside his car with the expression of a man watching his last chance slip away. Mama, Amara said as they drove home through the spring evening, why can't we just forgive him? People make mistakes sometimes. Grandma Ruby says that's how they learn to do better. Some mistakes, Zaria said carefully, are too big to learn from. Some choices show you who a person really is when it matters most. But that night, lying alone in the bed she had shared with dreams of a different future, Zaria wondered if she was protecting her heart, or simply punishing them both for the crime of wanting things that couldn't coexist. The fourth and final attempt came in May, delivered not through flowers or professional pretense or public encounters, but through the one person whose opinion Zaria couldn't dismiss, her mother. He's been calling me, Ruby announced over Sunday dinner, dropping the revelation like a bomb into the comfortable routine of their rebuilt life. Every week for 2 months, just to check on you and Amara, just to make sure you're both okay. Zaria set down her fork with deliberate care. And you didn't think to mention this? You made it clear that his name wasn't welcome in this house, Ruby said with characteristic directness. But baby girl, there comes a point where holding on to hurt does more damage than the original wound. This isn't about holding on to hurt. This is about protecting us from someone who's already proved he can't be trusted when it counts. Is it? Ruby's knowing gaze cut through every defense Zarya had constructed. Because from where I sit, it looks like two stubborn people who love each other, but are too proud to admit they both made mistakes. I didn't make any mistakes, Zarya said hotly. I trusted him with the most important thing in my life, and he betrayed that trust. You gave him an ultimatum designed to make him choose between his family and yours, Ruby countered with devastating accuracy. You put him in an impossible situation and then acted surprised when he made an impossible choice. The truth of that observation hit Zarya like cold water, forcing her to confront aspects of Christmas Eve she had carefully avoided examining. He should have chosen us, she said weakly. Should he? Based on what, 6 weeks of playing house and a child who wasn't biologically his? Honey, I love you, but you asked that man to give up everything he'd ever known for something that might not last beyond the first real crisis. It would have lasted, Zarya protested. But even as she spoke the words, she heard the uncertainty beneath them. Maybe it would have, Ruby said gently, but he'll never know now, because you made sure he couldn't find out. You ended things before they had a chance to really begin. As spring turned toward summer, Zarya found herself thinking more and more about her mother's words, about ultimatums and impossible choices, and the difference between protecting your heart and simply being afraid to use it. But by then, the phone calls to Ruby had stopped, the chance encounters had ended, and the man who had once made pancakes, like poetry, had apparently accepted that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. The war was over, and this time everyone had lost for good. Chapter 10. Redemption and Second Chances. August in Washington, D.C. arrived with oppressive heat when Amara's summer camp announcement changed everything. We're doing community service at the Brightwood Community Center to help with their reading program. 3 hours later, standing in the doorway of the community center's converted library, Zarya understood why her instincts had been screaming warnings. Because there, kneeling on a colorful carpet surrounded by elementary school children, was Hayden Thorne. He looked different, thinner, with longer hair and wearing jeans instead of expensive suits. He was reading with genuine enthusiasm, the children hanging on every word with rapt attention. "Mama?" Amara's voice carried wonder. "Is that Hayden?" Before Zarya could respond, Amara was across the room. "Hayden!" she called out with pure joy. He looked up, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw Amara was complete, unguarded happiness. Whatever else had happened in 8 months, his love for her daughter remained absolute. "Amara," he said softly, opening his arms for her enthusiastic hug. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Community service with my camp group. Are you helping too?" "I work here," Hayden said. "I help run the after-school program and the summer reading initiative." It was then that he saw Zarya in the doorway, and the careful composure he had maintained cracked slightly. "Hello, Zarya," he said quietly. In the controlled chaos that followed, Zarya found herself working alongside Hayden. He was good at this, patient with struggling readers, encouraging without condescending, naturally able to make learning feel like play. "Miss Zarya?" A small voice interrupted her observations. "Are you Mr. Hayden's wife? Because he talks about you a lot. He says you're the smartest, most beautiful woman in the world, and Amara is the best kid ever invented." The revelation hit like a physical blow. In 30 seconds, a 7-year-old had revealed that Hayden carried them in his daily conversations, like people who mattered. When the afternoon ended, Hayden approached carefully. "Would it be all right if I walked you to your car?" "I'd like to talk." Zarya looked at Amara's hopeful expression. 5 minutes. At the car, Hayden took a careful breath. I need you to know that everything changed that night. I chose wrong, chose the appearance of belonging over actually belonging. I chose fear over love, and I will regret that choice for the rest of my life. Regret doesn't change what happened, Zaria said quietly. No, but understanding why it happened can prevent it from happening again. I've spent 8 months learning to live differently, to build a life based on contribution rather than accumulation. He gestured toward the community center. I started volunteering here in January. Georgetown offered me a teaching position, but when I saw what real work looked like, helping kids discover they're capable of amazing things, I realized I'd never done anything that mattered before. Amara stepped closer with fearless directness. Did you miss us? Hayden knelt to meet her at eye level. Every single day, I missed your questions about bird apartments and the way you make everything more interesting just by being yourself. I missed being part of a family that chose each other. Then why didn't you come back? Because sometimes when you hurt people you love, they need time to heal before they can trust you again. And sometimes the person who caused the hurt needs time to become someone worthy of that trust. Have you, Zaria heard herself asking, become someone worthy of that trust? I think I'm becoming that person. The children here seem to think so. I sleep well at night knowing my work contributes something positive to the world, but the only opinions that really matter are yours and Amara's. Zaria studied this man who once defined himself through wealth, now speaking about meaningful work and earned satisfaction. The position here is permanent. Program director. Steady salary, health benefits, and job satisfaction that doesn't depend on family approval. I'll never be wealthy again, but I'll never be poor in the ways that actually matter. And your family? They've made it clear that rehabilitation requires distance from choices they consider damaging to our social standing. His voice carried accepted loss rather than grief. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing each other every day. Mama, Amara said quietly, can we forgive him now? The question carried such simple faith that Zaria felt tears threaten. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's something you choose every day. But we can start choosing, Amara pressed. We can practice forgiving until we get really good at it. Despite everything, Zaria smiled at her daughter's approach to emotional rehabilitation. Yes, we can practice. Hayden's face transformed with hope. I would like to practice being someone you can trust again. Someone who chooses right when it matters most. It won't be easy, Zaria warned. There will be bad days and difficult conversations. I know, but some people are worth the risk of trying again. Can we start with dinner? Amara asked. I want to show Hayden my room and make sure he remembers how to help with homework. Zaria looked at Hayden, seeing the same careful hope she felt building in her chest. Dinner and conversation, and the understanding that we're starting over. From the beginning. From the beginning, Hayden agreed, with better choices this time. As they walked toward their cars, Zaria allowed herself to believe that some endings were actually beginnings in disguise. That some love was strong enough to survive the worst choices, patient enough to wait for growth, brave enough to try again. 6 months later, when Hayden moved back into the guest room by invitation rather than emergency, he brought children's books, art supplies for Amara's projects, and a heart that had learned the difference between wanting to belong and actually belonging. When Amara announced her intention to build a monument dedicated to second chances, and Hayden offered to help with the architectural planning, and Zaria found herself laughing at their combined enthusiasm, she realized that happiness had never been about space or bank accounts. Happiness was about people who chose to fill the Space with love, laughter, and the daily miracle of trying to be better than they had been the day before. And in the end, that was more than enough. The end.